If you've been struggling with uncontrollable hunger, whether you're at maintenance or a calorie deficit to lose weight or body fat, but your appetite keeps winning, maybe you've looked into GLP-1 drugs like Wegovy or Mounjaro, and for some people, they're a great fit. But maybe you're curious about whether there's another way to work with your body's own appetite signals without a prescription. This episode is for you. Today, we're breaking down how your gut controls hunger at the hormonal level, what happens when you stimulate GLP-1 naturally versus pharmaceutically, and how one particular plant extract is showing results in clinical trials when it comes to meaningful appetite control. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, certified nutrition coach, Philip Pape, and today we're going to continue our series on appetite with a conversation about something that most people don't realize, that real physiological hunger is closely related to specific hormones, and there are more ways to address it than you might think. My guest is Sarah Kennedy, the founder and CEO of Calocurb, who is sponsoring our appetite series. And Sarah is a veterinarian by training with over 20 years in animal and human nutrition, an MIT Sloan Fellow, and she led the development of a natural appetite compound backed by over 30 million in research and 15 years of clinical study. We're going to get into details behind that in a bit. Her product works by stimulating your body's own GLP-1 production through bitter receptors in your gut. These are the same hormones targeted by weight loss drugs, but through a completely different mechanism. Today, you're going to learn why hunger is a biological signal that you can actually influence, how bitter compounds trigger a powerful hormonal cascade that reduces appetite, and how to think about the full landscape of appetite tools from lifestyle strategies to natural supplements to pharmaceuticals so you can make an informed decision about what fits your situation. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Philip. It's great to be here.
And I'd love to jump straight into the science just to set the stage for my audience of, what is happening in the gut when someone is really hungry or just hungry in general. And then I want to connect that to why bitter things, why compounds related to hops and specifically can connect to that and then affect our appetite. And then we can get into the research as well.
Sure. It is, as I said, I loved your introduction because there are so many things that affect us. And Calocurb, like many other things, is a tool in the toolkit for you. So hunger, what most people don't realize is our appetite control center is in our hindbrain. So this is our primitive, primal hindbrain, really important through evolution because this is what made us get out of the caves and go and hunt. So I love this fact. If you reduce your calories by 25%, your hunger will double over 4 months. And as I said, that is the way to get us out of the caves and to go and hunt something. As we'd all be lying in our caves going, oh, you know what, it's raining, I'm not going out. So this was driving us forward. So this is why 99% of diets fail. You're really good for a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe more, but that primal urge to eat, which is driven by ghrelin. So ghrelin is a hormone, we call it your hunger hormone. And then when you eat, the ghrelin goes down. And what most people don't realize is 45 minutes later when you've eaten, your digestion goes into your upper digestive tract, into out of your stomach. And that's when it signals these receptors to release appetite suppressing hormones. And there is more than one. In fact, I think, there's a lot more, but the ones we know are CCK, which is cholecystokinin, which is a very powerful but short-acting GLP-1. So we all know that, GIP and PYY. And these all go to the brain and say, you've eaten, it's okay, you're full. But of course, what happens in a lot of, all of us really, is we actually eat on the run. How many of us eat on the run? We eat too fast because that takes at least 45 minutes to an hour to signal your brain. So you eat on the run, you're throwing food down, and of course you eat more and suddenly you go, oh, I'm full, right? So you remember how your mother used to say, chew 10 times, so those are those things. So and then high fiber foods will give you more of those signals as well. So we don't sit down and eat that much. Look, I'm just as bad as anyone else, always grabbing something sitting at my desk. I'm not listening to my body. So your appetite is actually in your hindbrain. It drives you to go and get something to eat, which was important in evolution, but it is a bit of a liability for us now because in modern day developed world, we're surrounded by food.
We are indeed surrounded by lots of calorie dense foods. And a lot of the stuff you just mentioned, if the listeners go check out 2 episodes ago, we got into some of those hormones. But I love how, Sarah, how you brought up the evolutionary reason for this and the fact that when we are trying to diet, our body's essentially pushing back saying, wait a minute, something is lacking.
I don't want you to do that.
Exactly. Which unfortunately, many of us, we've gained the weight over several decades, most likely, especially around the holidays, right? We gain the weight and it's like, all of a sudden we look at ourselves and we're like, wait a minute, I need to do something about it. And this is where the challenge becomes, okay, crash diets can set you back. Also eating on the run, also just rushing and not being mindful about it, and then not having enough fiber. And I know there's other things like protein that trigger these gut signals as well. So once we understand that, we start to say, okay, there may be some tools we can put in place, which you've already alluded to, like, hey, maybe if we don't rush and we chew our food, potentially. I want to connect that to bitter hops specifically, because I've mentioned to my audience, like all the hacks, drinking water before you eat, eating spicy foods, like beyond just the fundamentals. And now that I've met you guys and invited you on the show and we did this appetite series, I looked a lot more into it and was pretty excited about how it works specifically with receptors in the gut. So tell us about that. Where does bitterness come in?
Yeah, so I'll just go back to the start. So it was 2009, 2010, a group of very talented scientists in New Zealand. So just to give you a little background, all primary research in New Zealand is sponsored by the government. So this is so we get what we call blue sky research. So about 15 years ago, a group of talented scientists employed by the government had a hypothesis that they would find a plant-based extract that suppressed appetite. Now, why did they have that? They had that because of historical reasons. Historical reasons were in times of famine in the Scottish Highlands, Scottish people chewed very, very bitter berries, heath berries, to suppress their appetite. Also, interesting enough, in the Kalahari Desert, tribesmen will chew very, very bitter cactus before they go hunting to suppress their appetite. That was, in fact, the origin of hoodia. So they had this and a few other. And then there'd been some recent work on washing mouse stomachs with bitter substances to reduce appetite. So they had this hypothesis. They put into the government a grant it was called Foods for Appetite Control, and got $20 million back for a 6-year program to look at this. Just some extraordinary work. So what they did was, first of all, they took 300 biopsies, 300 human biopsies, to show that we actually have taste receptors in our stomach and guts. Now, no one had actually proven that before. And when these taste receptors are stimulated, they will release different hormones. So these little taste receptors sit in the L cells, and they are our receptors. So they literally map from the stomach right down to the lower colon, these bitter taste receptors, and then could show what they released. Hilarious story getting these human biopsies, because Dr. Edward Walker, the senior scientist, had to go and hang out in hospital for about 2 years and go and approach people and go, hey, because you actually needed someone with a normal physiology who was either having a colonoscopy, or I always get it wrong, an enteroscopy. And so finally they got these samples, but, hanging out in hospitals to get them and showed them all. So once it showed that they mapped them right down through the gastrointestinal tract. They then tested over 1,000 extracts, natural plant and some pharmaceutical ones, to test what made these express when something was put on them. Not surprisingly, only 2 things did. One was a potato oxalate, which is fantastic, but it's poisonous, so you'd be thin and dead. But the other one was hops. And because they're plant and food research, they then tested another 50 varieties. Why? I say not surprisingly. This is a secondary evolutionary mechanism to protect us. So if you ate something very, very bitter, you would spit it out. If it went to your stomach, you would probably vomit it up, or if it wasn't so much, it would encourage you to release ghrelin, because that would say, eat more and you will dissipate that potential toxin. But if it goes past the stomach into the upper duodenum or the upper intestinal tract, it's too late then. So what it does is it stimulates these bitter taste receptors to release these appetite suppressing hormones to go to your brain to say, you're full. So stop eating, you're full. So basically what they were trying to do is super stimulate these bitter taste receptors. So we're telling the brain you're full. So as I said, they tested 1,000 different extracts, and only one was the sort of what they called the eureka, and that was this hops. And then they found the specific hop, which was really the one that was the strongest and the best. And then they did a whole lot of things like dose dependency and so on like that. So that was sort of the background, which I think everyone skips over, but so incredible to map this whole thing in our physiology and to explain why we had it.
Yeah, that is incredible. I do love understanding evolutionary biology and how the context, because we're in a different environment today, as you mentioned before. And if we can kind of leverage, take advantage of, in some cases, quote unquote, hack, our own bodies to our benefit, which in an artificial world, sometimes you have to do things that are a little different, just to give yourself an advantage. I wonder so you said bitter and then the hops specifically, and that these super stimulate the appetite, or super stimulate appetite suppressant, I guess, right? Where do other compounds fit relative to this? And before we recorded, I mentioned things like capsaicin and saffron, because there's other things people talk about for appetite suppressant. Is there kind of a spectrum of how stimulating they are?
Yeah. So what I will say is some of them will stimulate. It's more likely to be in the stomach, and that's when you'll get the ghrelin. So with our bitter hops, we deliver them to the upper duodenum. So they're delayed release capsules, and they go down to the upper duodenum where they release. And that's where we get this super stimulation. If they released in the stomach, we'd be more likely to get ghrelin. The other thing is, a lot of things will say they stimulate GLP-1. And yes, they will. But unless you stimulate GLP-1 and the other appetite suppressing hormones over 400%, you will not get a behavioral change. You might get a drop in blood glucose, but you will not get a behavioral change. We stimulate GLP-1 or CCK and GLP-1 at 600%. And that's why. So going on with the story, they then knew that they could get this, they could stimulate these in the lab, but then they took it into a human clinical trial. So the first human clinical trial. And it was 20 males, which doesn't sound a lot, but it is what you needed for this clinical. And they cannulated. So they had blood coming out of these people. I think it was like every 20 minutes. So it was a very expensive trial. And they cannulated them. And they gave them Calocurb. It was in those days, wasn't called Calocurb. It was, they gave them the capsule an hour before an ad libitum or an eat till you're full lunch and an eat till you're full dinner. Eat till full lunch and eat and snack. And then they measured the bloods over the next, I think it was 2 hours. And they measured these hormones in them. And what you see is enormous. You see placebo, where when you eat, you will release your own GLP-1. And then you see this huge spike where we have super stimulated it to get this 600% increase in GLP-1, or twice what we'd call the postprandial amount or post-eating amount. And then we got an average of an 18% reduction in calorie intake. So the control group ate 18% less than the placebo group. Now, just as a comparison, a semaglutide, which is like an Ozempic, will give you around about a 25% reduction. So you can see the difference, 18% or 25%. So there is nothing, and I look all the time, but there is nothing in the world that super stimulates like amarisate, the active ingredient, or this hops does at 600%.
Okay, so that answers a question I had about the threshold and the quantity of how these get stimulated related to that compound, amarisate. What makes it unique? Like, is it regarding what you can tell us? Because I know it's patented. What makes it unique versus just me going and finding these hops in the wild and just crushing them up and eating them?
Yeah, well, there's actually quite a few things with it. It is a specific variety. It is very high in what we'd call the alpha and beta acids. So, but what most people don't realize, this is what we use to flavor beer. It was actually used as a preservative and to flavor beer. So very high in that. The other thing we do is we extract it using supercritical extraction, CO2 supercritical extraction. So we take out all of the flavonoids, so all of the phytoestrogens. So you're left with no phytoestrogens, because we often get asked, well, what about the phytoestrogens? They're all gone. All you're left with is the alpha and beta acids and a small amount of essential oil. So guys don't really mind that, because if they get a burp, it'll be like a beer burp. And they're like, oh, I just had a beer. So that's sort of, it is the variety. It is how it's extracted. The other thing is we put it in a delayed release LICAP.
Mm-hmm.
So a delayed release capsule that does release in the upper duodenum or the upper gut. So it releases 45 minutes later. So you wouldn't want to crush it up. You wouldn't want to eat it. And, so there is a number of things that go into it.
Right, because like you said, if it gets digested too early in the tract, it actually can release ghrelin, and then you actually get hungrier to try to dilute the poison, the toxic. I get it. Cool. That's explaining a lot. So what about, and by the way, I'm not a big fan of IPAs. I don't drink much at all anyway, because, alcohol's not great for you. But now they have a good use for those hops, it sounds like, other than IPAs.
We always get asked, well, if I drink beer, will I get the same? No, because when you put hops in beer, you actually isomerize them. So you actually cook them. So you've taken away that activity. So unfortunately, beer won't do it either.
People are always looking for an angle. Always looking for that angle to drink. What now? Are there other hormones that are triggered through this process besides GLP-1? Is it all the other appetite suppressant hormones as well?
Yeah. So what's fantastic about it? It first of all releases CCK. Now, CCK, as I said, is a very potent but short-lived appetite suppressing. So it does that first. That's the first part of the gastrointestinal tract. Gastroenterologists love it because it actually squeezes the gallbladder. CCK squeezes the gallbladder. So often on the synthetic GLP-1s, you'll get stasis or your gallbladder won't squeeze, which can lead to gallbladder stones. So gastrointestinal, they love it. The next part it goes down, it releases GLP-1, which is your appetite suppressing as well and much longer lived. And then lastly, in the lower part, it releases PYY. So you're getting three you're getting three appetite suppressing hormones, literally three for the one pill. And it has a persistency. So it lasts for 4 to 6 hours. So a lot of people say, hey, these hormones get broken down in 2 minutes. Well, they do. But the thing is, as it travels down, I kind of liken it to a pinball machine. At a pool, it's going down, it's banging against these taste receptors, and it's activating them as it goes down. So it lasts for 4 to 6 hours. And I will tell you about the following clinicals, which we know why it lasts for 4 to 6 hours with it. So think of this pinball machine. The other thing we get asked a lot was, well, do I have to keep taking it? Am I doing it? What we're actually doing is we're upregulating your gut-brain axis. So if you think about it, when you inject yourself with a GLP-1 injectable, so a synthetic, nothing wrong with those. But when you inject yourself, you are down-regulating your hormones because your hormones go, you know what? I don't need to do anything. I'm going on holiday now. And, we know this happens. And, if you think of it like testosterone, if you inject testosterone, your own natural testosterone goes down. So whenever you use a synthetic hormone, your own hormones decrease. So they go on holiday. So this is why when people come off the injectables or the synthetics, they get this intense hunger because they don't have any natural left and often regain the weight. So Amarisate or Calocurb is upregulating. So we like to say we're actually improving your gut-brain axis. And as we get older, your gut-brain axis is less because your little taste receptors die, everything we've done to our bodies over the years. So we are improving that gut-brain axis.
Yeah, that's incredible. Upregulating hormones. We're talking, like you said, the GLP-1, the CCK, the PYY. Oh, and then just to reiterate for the listeners what Sarah was saying, just normal eating increases those roughly, it sounds like 300%-ish, and these double that, and you get 18% reduction in calories consumed versus 25% for GLP-1 or 0 for placebo, right? Roughly, or maybe it's a little more if you think you're in the study. I think one of the trials, correct me if I'm wrong, showed that females had a stronger response than men. Is that true?
Yeah, that was a fascinating trial, and I'm really proud we did it because less than 30% of clinical trials are done on females, and literally because females have hormones. And I was a bit grumpy. When we had to do it. I was registering in Australia, and if anyone says I've got an Australian accent, I'll be very, very upset. It's New Zealand. No, but we had to do it for registration, and so it was an appetite. It was on hunger and craving. And interesting, when we did it on men, we needed 30 men. It probably took 6 weeks, right? In females, it took 18 months. And it was $250,000. The reason is that you had to sync women on exactly the same day of their menstrual cycle, on the same day of their menstrual cycle each month, and on the same day of the week. And you had to do 3 times with the same woman and it was over COVID because we did placebo, low dose, high dose. So this was a huge trial, and I'm really proud we did it, but I was a bit grumpy at the time. But I'm so proud of it because women are more sensitive to GLP stimulation. And they think, we don't know, but they think once again it's evolutionary because it protected the fetus. If you could have potentially protected the fetus. So this is sort of the suggestion behind it. But what we did was a 24-hour fast. So a water-only 24-hour fast. And we gave Calocurb at 16 hours into the fast and 20 hours. So these are the times when you'll be the hungriest in that last 8 hours. And we measured hunger, craving, and then rebound eating. So in that last 8 hours, we got 100% decrease in increased hunger. So at 24 hours, they were no more hungry than they were at 16 hours. And we got 120% decrease in craving. So they were craving less at 24 hours than they were at 16 hours. And then we also gave a rebound eating, which was once again an ad libitum, and they ate 14.5% less calories, and that was after 24 hours. So you can actually equate that to, we say a 30% reduction over 24 hours. You can say a 30% reduction in hunger, a 40% reduction in craving, and, an average of an 18% reduction in calorie intake. So, yeah, it was a absolutely superb response in the woman, and, and leads it on to how it can be used. It doesn't always have to be used for weight. Certainly, a woman in a menstrual cycle in her luteal phase will on average eat 200 calories more a day. And really, it's normal. It's natural. Your body is preparing in case you're going to implant an egg.
For ovulation. Yep.
That's right. So it's preparing and doing all of that. So women can eat up to 600 calories more a day. And, it's like that. We're calling PMS, I just want chocolate. So incredible, in that week. of the menstrual cycle. And the wonderful thing about Calocurb, you can come in and out of it because it works in an hour. You don't have to build up a dosage. You don't have to do anything like that. So, yeah, you can say, I'm just going to take it then. Of course, the other thing is in menopausal women, just so not fair, is it? And not only, you actually have to eat 200 calories less a day just to stay the same size because you're dropping estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
So
lower metabolic rate.
Yeah. So, and as I said, you can come in and out of it. So, yeah.
No, that's power. Yeah, I was curious about that, right? Because I have a lot of clients, women, and I know individual variation is large. Some women don't notice much of a change, and others big cycles with their training, with their recovery, and with their appetite. And that's really powerful. Like you said, it's not just to lose weight and be in a deficit. It could just be to offset periods of hunger. I could see this being a tool when you have specific moments or events where you can use it as well. I've been telling my audience that I'm going to use it for my next fat loss phase as well to show them how it can be used as a tool. And then the other thing is I was going to ask you, have there been any long-term cohorts studied with like calorie deficit, or weight loss phases or extreme approaches of that? Like, have there been anything like that?
Oh my God. So I'm just smiling at that. And I can't say too much, but I raised $3 million 3 years ago for our largest human clinical, which was a long one. And it was just unblinded in November. And the results were amazing. And I'm not allowed to say them yet because it has to be published. So we're waiting for it to be published in April. But yeah, I'm over the moon. And that's a long term. So it was 150 patients, men and women, BMI between 25 and 35, 6 months, and very little intervention. So they had a group, this is what the scientist told me, they have a group tutorial once a month by Skype. So that was the only intervention, no diet, no exercise, no nothing. So, yeah, it was unblinded and I got the top line in December. So very, very new and really promising amazing results. So I'll be able to talk about them in April.
What a tease. And of course I ask, right? Because everybody knows the numbers from the GLP-1 agonists where it's anywhere from, I think the basic semaglutide, something like 15, 17% or something up to like tirzepatide and the new retatrutide, I forget how to pronounce it, is like up to 30. Up to 30%, and so the kind of range I think in people's heads are like 15 to 25% ish. And so whatever your number is, if it's even 5 or 10%, it's still an improvement. So it sounds like you're optimistic. I'm excited for that. Maybe we have you on back again when that happens.
I'd love to. It's an amazing result and I'm not allowed. I'll be absolutely flat, but I can say it's so promising and I'm over the moon. But,
Cool.
It's really interesting. Anecdotally, we get thousands of people coming back and going, this has really helped me. I've lost weight. I've done this. And, we know anecdotally it's amazing. But however, to have this long-term cohort and it to be published in April is fantastic. So it was worth, for 3 years I'm going, yeah, we're doing it. And I'd raised all this money and yeah, we're doing it. And then suddenly it was like a month away and I'm like, oh my God. But anyway, yeah, so all good.
So the natural next question is, will there then have to be a follow-up on what happens when if they stop using Calocurb for a while, just like when you stop using GLP-1s? And, we talked about the weight regain and you talked about upregulation of hormones. Is there going to be a study for that as well?
Yeah, we did. Yes, we did. We did a 3-month follow-up and that was a great result as well. Okay. So, but that's all I'm allowed to say.
No, it's okay. Listeners, I don't know anything about this. I'm totally asking questions that I'm curious about. So obviously you're trying to answer them and they'll be answered shortly. So you guys just have to wait.
Everything we do at Calocurb, we have 4 values. And the first one is we are science-led. So everything we say and do is science-led. And we have a US regulatory consultant that we consult we have our own scientists here, but we have a US regulatory consultant. So everything we say is legal and backed by a clinical study. our second value is customer success, because if they're not successful, we're not successful. So we always get this little whoop in the office if we get an amazing email back. The other one is simplicity. We literally use all of our money for science. We don't try and expand our product range. We don't try and do anything like that. We are about Calocurb. So, I always say we're a tool in the toolkit. And like you said, protein. I can't talk more about that. Those are other tools, but we don't expand on that. So, yeah, we have pretty, and then our last one is passion, but with integrity. It's such a sensitive such a sensitive area that, we have to, and, my own story is, why did I get into it? I'd battled with food my whole life, and, yo-yo dieting, always on. And, I don't think I was ever, I'd sort of go in and out. I was never terribly overweight, but just battled that food noise, loving food, but hating it, this love-hate relationship. And then then Calocurb came along. So obviously it resounded with me. And then I took it for the first time, and I'm like, this is incredible. So now we've been around 6 years. I can say I've got this absolute, I'm at peace with food. I can eat, but I just don't eat as much. I mean, I still take Calocurb. We used to say, gin is mummy's little helper. I say it's not gin, it's Calocurb, because it doesn't matter what you're doing. As I said, you are surrounded by food every day. So you just want it, you want to eat it. You just want to eat less of it. You don't want to not eat. You just want to eat less of it and have that control mechanism.
Yeah, you mentioned food noise, and that has become more of a topic of conversation with the GLP-1s. When they first came out, many of us in this industry were, either skeptical or kind of jumped on that bandwagon of judgment and criticism of, hey, this is a shortcut, this is a quick fix kind of thing. And I think the nuance has come into the equation over the last, couple of years. Obviously, Ozempic came out 30 years ago. People don't realize that, or something like that. But the more recent ones, and I had a guy on this show. His name is Jamie Selzler, and he was 650, approaching 700 pounds.
Wow.
He just recently got under 300, and he talked about how he needed to cut out that food noise. Now he went the pharmaceutical route as he needed to. It was so extreme of a situation. He was at death's door. But I think you bring up an important point in that there's body image, there's the weight loss industry, there's the whole spectrum of like, do you do this naturally? Where do supplements fit in, and where does all that fit in? And I'm a big fan of looking at these things as tools, not using them as a crutch necessarily. So having said that, you said you still take Calocurb. What are the experiences of some people taking Calocurb in conjunction with lifestyle changes? And maybe that's from an education standpoint on your end, or something else.
Yeah, look, there's a number of ways to use Calocurb, but, the first one is if you want to use it as an alternative. You just want to go that natural route. You don't want to inject yourself. You can't take the side effects. So absolutely. But once again, as you say, you've got to put lifestyle changes in. I say if you go from 10 donuts to 8 donuts, it's really not going to make a lot of difference other than 2 donuts. But so, you want to be thinking about that, your diet, whole foods. Protein is a fabulous thing because it does fill you up, particularly as you're getting older, because our muscles degrade by 0.5% a year. So absolutely. And exercise, strength exercise. So as an alternative, just quietening that noise down, allowing you to eat less. A lot of physicians are using it in combination. And that's a really interesting one because they will start them off on Calocurb. And if they're not getting the exact result, they'll then put them onto an injectable. So they can start at the lowest dose, but stay at the lowest dose. Because if you think about it, when you're injecting your synthetic hormone, right? But you're using Calocurb at the same time. So you're stimulating your natural hormones. So you're getting both. So you don't need, because you have to keep upping your dose on the injectables because you're desensitizing your body. You're bathing your body in this high synthetic hormones 24 hours a day for 7 days. So You want to keep it lower if you can and increase. And what they're finding is in day 5, that it stops that breakthrough hunger. So use it in combination, really great usage like that. And then the third one I say is not an if, it's a must. When you come off an injectable, remember I said your own natural GLP-1 levels are at 0. They're like, hey, I'm still on holiday. I'm not coming back. So titrate off using Calocurb and stay on Calocurb until that brain access starts working again. And this is why you just see this enormous rebound, because, the hunger comes back. So you've got to restart or kickstart that gut-brain access. And interesting, I read a study the other day, because we look at the physiology, and I talked to you about the physiology dampening down that natural GLP-1 or making that go to 0. But that's a physiology, but there is a psychology as well. They did this measurement on people coming off GLP-1. 100% had fear and hopelessness coming off. You don't want your patients to feel that. You don't want people to feel fear and hopelessness because they've come to depend on them. So, 3, alternative, in combination, and absolutely coming off.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the fact that you could use them in combination, but that makes total sense. And it makes me think of, when we've had members in our group who come in on tirzepatide, for example, and they're lifting weights and they're walking and they're eating better than they have before, and they want to titrate off of it. And I have seen that situation where even if they slowly do that, the hunger is really ramping up. And I can see Calocurb as a solution, even because one of the solutions I've had to offer is let's just eat more and get back to maintenance, or even shift into a bulking phase timed with you coming off, because now you're going to eat more. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily address the root cause with the hunger. So that's fantastic. Speaking of food noise, then, I know with the medications, some people have other types of noise and addiction reduced in the brain. Does it have a similar effect because it comes down to GLP-1, or is that another mechanism happening in those?
Well, no, once again, we think it does, because your appetite center is right by your addiction center, really, in your hindbrain. And so we have had a lot of people coming to us and going, I just drink less alcohol. I just drink this. So we think it does, but we haven't done any clinicals on it. So I think it's going to help. And of course, if you feel fuller, I do know it takes away that sweet craving. So many people say that after dinner treat, when I'm watching television or something like that, I eat less. But yes, we have heard about it with alcohol.
Well, now that brings up another question. You mentioned the cravings. So on GLP-1s, some people find like fattier, ultra-processed foods kind of repulsive, or they get sick. Do you see some of that as well? Even if it's anecdotally, I appreciate your nuance that we haven't studied all of these.
Well, we do know the craving. We did do that clinical in women. We were showed 120% less in craving, and it was actually a sweet craving. So we do know that. So yes, and absolutely what we're finding is a lot of people say to us, hey, after dinner, I would always sit with my husband and I'd have, some chocolate or something like that. It's sort of a reward for the end of the day. And they're like, I don't need it. So I always say, if that's when you're getting your worst cravings, remember with Calocurb, you must take it at least an hour before a main meal. The reason being is nothing particular. It's just got to go it's got to get past your stomach and go into your upper duodenum. So take it with water. It doesn't matter if it's 2 hours. It doesn't matter if it's 3 hours. We only say an hour to make it easier. Like, I intermittent fast. So I take mine about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and then I can go through till 12 or 1 o'clock. And, and I can walk past that muffin. I can walk past that and I'm fine. But, you can take it. But if you're trying to reduce your portions, take it at least an hour and a half. And how do you remember that? I always say, look, 10:30 in the morning, if that's when you get your cup of coffee or you get your morning tea. I'm very English in saying morning tea, isn't it? That's what we have. Have our morning tea is have your Calocurb then. And in the afternoon, about 3 o'clock, you'll get that slump or you're a bit tired. take your Calocurb then with a large glass of water.
So that's the protocol, and the timing makes sense because you mentioned before it takes about 45 minutes with the timed release to get in there, and then it lasts 4 to 6 hours, meaning you have a big window. So I like that. My mind is already going to not just a typical like calorie deficit type fat loss phase, but sometimes I'll run with more advanced clients something called rapid fat loss, which there's different forms of that out there, right? Like protein modified fast. Lyle McDonald has his version of that, kind of this evidence based, 2-week or 3-week approach where you're eating almost exclusively protein for like 4 days, and then you refeed, back all the way up to your maintenance calories for a day, kind of recover some leptin and get a little psychological boost and all that. This could be a really powerful tool for that as well, because now you're talking about slashing calories by like 45% from your maintenance just for a short duration. But some people can't even handle that and they want to give it a shot. So it's in my head, Sarah, as a possibility.
It would be fantastic for that. And that's why I say, people use it for all, like people use it when they're going on holiday, because they're on a cruise and they just don't want to eat too much. They use it. But, you can come in and out of it. That's what I love. If I've gone to a degustation dinner or something like that, I'm like, I'm not going to take my Calocurb, because I want to eat my dinner. So, these are the ways you can use it. We do say when people start on it, just start, there is a ramp up, and really, like everything. Remember, this is a biologically active product. Some people, around 5% of people are what we call super tasters, so super gut tasters. So they will just need one capsule. So we just say start low and slow and build up over 2 to 3 days. The dosage is 2 capsules, before a main meal, before lunch and before dinner, if you're reducing calories. But you may be one of the super tasters, the 5%, and you may only need one. And you will know if you've had too much because you'll get a laxative effect. That's all. You will get, it'll be an hour after you've taken it, and it's a laxative effect. So nothing to stress about. And the other thing we get asked just to let you know, it's incredibly safe. We did some human bioavailability trials, and less than 1% is absorbed. 1% is absorbed in the bloodstream. So, and of that 1%, less than 5% of that 1%, so 0.001, is metabolized in the liver. So really important, because people go, well, I'm taking other drugs, and sometimes supplements can either speed them up or slow them down. We don't do any of that. We're exclusive to the gut.
I'm glad we have this conversation because you covered, I think, all the bases, but I want to give you the opportunity, Sarah. Is there a base that we haven't covered that we should address before we sign off about Calocurb or about hunger or anything we talked about today?
No, I think, I'm terribly proud of it. As I said, it came from, and it's still owned by the government. Most people don't realize that. And we have the worldwide license to it. So everything we do has to be totally correct, because they own the technology, and they veto, they do all of the clinical trials and so on like that. So there's no, it's really above board. So I'm very proud of it. As you can imagine, I think what it does, it assists us in the modern world. We have a primitive brain that hasn't evolved with the modern world. So it is just really, and once again, to your point, a tool in the toolkit. You have to do other things with it. But, these are all things that are controllable if you take that noise out of your head, which, remember, is evolutionary. It was driving you to hunt. So don't blame yourself. It is what we were designed to do.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I think it's a powerful tool with a lot of upsides. And if you're listening or if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to comment below. If you have questions, we'll get them to Sarah. And I will include a link in the show notes to get 10% off Calocurb. By the way, you guys can go to witsandweights.com/Calocurb to try it out. Definitely just give it a shot. You don't even have to subscribe. Just grab one, try it out, and you'll know pretty quickly, I think, if it helps you out. So, Sarah, besides that, where can people reach you or the company to kind of learn more about this or just say hello?
Yeah, just go to our website, which is www.calocurb, CALOCURB.com. So Calocurb. And look, people always say, why did you name it that naff name? But the thing is, when you go to name something, it's really, really hard to get something that you can trademark globally. So anyway, so Calocurb, or you can just go hello at Calocurb, and we'll literally answer your questions same day.
When I first mentioned this to my wife, she's like, oh, like curb your calories. I'm like, yes, exactly. Because I didn't even notice it the first time.
Yeah,
she was just like, boom.
Yeah, because we call the hop extract a marasate. And as I said, never, ever let scientists name anything, because it was named that when they brought it to me. And a marasate meaning bitter in Latin and satiation in Latin, so bitter satiation. But of course, no one in the world can pronounce it. But the scientists still love it. They're like, oh yeah, it's such a good name. So I'm like, look, you guys stay with the science.
I hear you. The hormones are hard to pronounce. They're all hard to pronounce. At least I think of my country, America, and I'm like, America, Marasate. There we go. That's how I remember it.
Okay. That's good.
That's how I did it. After I listened to like 3 other podcast episodes to make sure it's said the right way. All right, Sarah. Well, this has been a pleasure. I learned a ton, which is my first goal, because then I know the listeners are going to learn a lot. And thank you again for being on, and thank you for this partnership as well. I'm looking forward to using the product myself personally, and then maybe experimenting with different ways that clients and listeners can use it as well. So thank you, Sarah.
I can't wait to come back and talk to you about the
study.
Yes. Can't wait to.
Yes. That's a great hook. We're going to be dying to hear about that. All right, Sarah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on Wits and Weights.